Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Strat Gamer here, providing you with a new Anno 1800 episode. And today this is quite a special episode because we're not gonna be really in game, but we're gonna be talking about the devblog that just went out. Of course, if you've missed this devblog, don't hesitate to check in the description below. I have posted the link for you to go read it. And of course, we're not gonna be just reading it together. The goal is really to understand what they mean, what are the exciting things, what are maybe the least exciting things that we see here. And given that I was part of the technical test of that DLC, I hope I can also bring a bit of color on some of those elements and maybe highlight things that you've missed while reading it. So let's dive in. But before we dive in, please do consider subscribing to the channel. If you're into strategy games, city building games, simulations, that's exactly what I cover. So don't hesitate to subscribe so you help the channel and you never miss another video. Okay, so this is the first of two devblog for this last DLC of Season 3 and probably last DLC of Anno 1800. So this first devblog is focused on the skyscrapers, which, as the first paragraph says, is sort of the central element of the high life. We've known that for a while. Both visually, it will of course change definitely the skyline of our cities, but also from a gameplay perspective, a lot of us have been expecting those skyscrapers to change a few things, and in particular for Min-Maxer to bring new population records. So let's see later on in the devlog if we can think that will arrive. I think one thing that really was interesting to me is, as it says in the second paragraph, that this DLC was really meant for late game, and I think that's very relevant given that it's probably the last DLC of Anno 1800. So it's good to be focusing on the end game. Most people have by now have sort of gone through the game, right? So we don't want another thing that's supposed to be supporting you in the mid game, making the mid game easier, like Dockland was supposed to be. And yeah, the high life really is something I think for us min-maxer out there. So really exciting about that. If you see in the second paragraph, they are saying skyscraper as a way to maximize population. So we can definitely, and I won't give any spoiler, of course, but we can definitely expect new records with that one. So that's really interesting. One element though, for talking about those records is the recent records since Land of Lions are really focused on scholars, right? If you've seen my series on the Maya record on a bit more than 3 million people, it's really focused on the scholars, and of course the world record when using Docklands, because in my series I don't use Dockland, but when using Docklands around 5.6 million people is also almost only scholars, right? Now the skyscrapers are for engineers and investors, so obviously that shows we're gonna need to go back and if your whole game right now is focused on scholars, well, be ready to create a new one or destroy all of those scholars and replace them by investors if you want to get to new records. Now the next paragraph is a bit around the historical reference of the skyscraper, and also sort of answering question that many have asked around the sort of evolution from Anno 1800 to new things. It could be around the electricity, the oil, and here the skyscraper, which didn't really exist in the early 1800s, but definitely, as it says here, started to be a lot more common in the United States around the 1900s. So this is how Anno is moving also in time, and once again, as I said, this is supposed to be an end game. So that's what they are saying here is, maybe you're starting in 1800, but when you arrive to your end game where you have, I don't know, 100,000 of investors and things like this, it probably makes sense that indeed you are not in 1800 anymore, but maybe more around 1900, and therefore you could have access to those skyscraper. One element also that's quite interesting here is they're talking about the arrival of hydraulic elevators. And if you've seen one of the last on Twitter from the Anno team. This was around introducing those elevators, and you know those elevators those sound more like a material, so similar to your wood, your concrete, etc., rather than a need for the building. So that's also interesting to see if if you have a very developed game and you want to create a lot of skyscraper very quickly, you may actually need to create a lot of these um, buildings that will produce the hydraulic elevator, many of them, if you want to be able to develop quickly those skyscrapers. So make sure that you do leave space for that. And you'll probably need some resources. Let's not talk about which, but you can try to guess which one. Okay, now moving on to the visuals. Similarly, they have shared a few visuals in the past. Very early, actually, there were one that was showing sort of just investor houses on top of each other. And this is sort of the idea where you're going to go from an investor or an engineer house, and you're going to build on top a number of modules for engineers 3 and for investor up to 5 to go vertically. But what's interesting that each of these modules actually has several visual that you'll be able to choose from, so to make some interesting architectural pictures out there. Now, I won't go too much into detail into this art here. Let's move on to, as I said, the modular approach is really 3 level for engineers, 5 for investors. Each level is adding sort of a module on top, which you can change the visual to make sure that it looks the way you want to look at. And of course, this will increase the population, as we said, so that's how we could be able to reach new records, but it will also increase the needs. So with those needs will also come, if you have new needs, that means you need new space for these needs, right? So there's also going to be interesting calculation around what is the optimal point, right? Do you give all of the needs to all of the residents, or is that taking too much space compared to the additional population that you're getting? So that's going to be some interesting math for us min-maxer out there. But yeah, it's a new challenge for sure. Then in terms of mechanics and challenges, I think this is where it gets to me really interesting. And you can see here they have a fun fact on the technical tests. We can talk about that. And this is also to me where I really liked how the developers seems to have actually taken into account a lot of the feedback that we gave during the technical test. So I'm really okay. So as we said, there will be some new challenge, right? It's not as if you're just getting more population in the same space. The first one is cost maintenance. And a lot of people out there in the last few years, we've all been saying money is not a problem. As soon as you have investor, money is not a problem. But actually, this is where it could come back into fashion. Money could become a resource again, because at least during the technical test, the cost maintenance was pretty high. So that's going to be an interesting challenge, I feel, because we haven't had to deal with money. I mean, most of the players out there that you can see on YouTube or Twitch, etc., we have 1 billion of reserve in the bank, and we make several million per second. So that wasn't a problem, but now it could be. Then the second element is a completely new mechanics called the Panorama effect, and we'll see later in the blog. So I won't go into detail there. And then, as I said earlier, there's new needs on sort of the basic need, but also on the luxury for your happiness. So that's going to be interesting. And of course, those needs are linked to the residents, right? So if you don't give those needs, you won't get more residents. So that won't be interesting. And on top of that, there's also a tax revenue impact, as always, for those needs, which hopefully you want, sort of to balance with the maintenance. So that's going to be quite an interesting element. And then the last element that is mentioned here is that with skyscrapers, and I won't, as always, give you spoilers, but it's, as it is written here, some of the levels will be able to also provide you with influence points. So once again, that is an interesting element in our balance in min-maxim, where we need to use the influence the best way possible. Now, they are mentioning an interesting challenge, and to be honest, here I'm not 100% sure I understood what they're saying, because I also faced the problem during the technical test, but the sentence here is a bit strange, because basically what they're saying is that the residents now consume based on the maximum total possible population. And to my understanding, that was already the case before, right? It was when you upgrade a new residence to the next tier, even if the population is not there yet, your consumption increases immediately, and it's linked to the maximum population on that house. Because the other way to see that was when you put items that will increase your population, your max population, the consumption would increase again. So I think the only thing that they are saying here is that this is still the case, but instead of just having, let's say, one number that's linked to the residence, it's now actually linked to which of the goods you are providing. So let's say that you're not providing all of the goods, either because they're still locked or because you decided to block them. Then I think the max population will decrease, and therefore the consumption on that house will also decrease. And this would definitely be new if my understanding is correct of what they're saying. But let's see. I guess we're gonna have to see during the game. But as they were saying here, during the technical test, we did find that sometimes when increasing skyscraper to a new level, the consumption was doing very strange things. And then one thing that is here that you may have missed is that sentence. Despite this, you still unlock the skylight tower. And actually I did during my test. But the interesting part here is the skyline tower. As you can see, we have sort of a new, let's say, monument. I won't say a lot more about this monument, but it is definitely a very interesting one. I don't know if they're gonna change, if they are changing between the technical test and the final version, let's say the numbers that are linked to that skyline tower. If they do, that could be something really, really interesting. If they don't, that is still something interesting, but with clear limits. But anyway, that is definitely a new goal for us all out there, a new big monument to create, and not just for the min-maxer, but also for beauty builders and all of us. And as they're saying here is, in addition to the consumption, the maintenance cost of the skyscrapers were another point of balancing. As I said a few minutes ago, is the maintenance cost at the beginning of the technical test were huge, to the point where we all got into negative very quickly. So it's going to be interesting to see how they've been balancing that. I do think it's very important that these costs are high, because that brings to me a very interesting new challenge where money is not a non-issue anymore, but at the same time it does need to be balanced because we want something feasible. Now, another element where I'm really, I'm glad that they listened to some of our feedback is around the UI for this skyscraper, and in particular on the needs. So, I won't go into all of the details here. You can read it for yourself, but they're basically saying that it was a bit of work because, first of all, especially if you think about the engineers. So the engineers are supposed to be able to improve into investors, but now they're also supposed to be to be able to improve into skyscrapers engineers, right? So you have two choices. So how do you show those choices to people? Obviously for investors, how do you show that it's not the end and you can still create skyscrapers of different levels too? And talking about those levels is how do you show that to the player, right? Like you can see here, 2 levels. There's a slightly different one, and then a completely different one where it's at the top. So in terms of UI, that is somewhat important. And we're going to see also the UI in terms of the actual game just after. And the second element that was quite important is around the goods, the needs for sort of basic needs, but also happiness, as we're adding a lot of new ones. So how do we show that? And this is something where basically what we're saying here, first of all, you can see what I was saying just now, that you're able to see, are you going to go to a skyscraper here, or do you want to go from engineers to investor, for example, is going to be here. But the other element I was talking about is the goods, right? The needs. And we can see here, it doesn't say which level it is, but as you can see, it says 70. Now here it says 275. So we can talk about that too. But you can see those new goods here. And basically on many screens, there were so many goods here that then that guy started to be here. So that obviously doesn't work, especially because sometimes you want to see what's behind. On one of the solutions that they did, I think they're explaining somewhere here, is that they introduced a scrolling bar. So you could only see, those ones, and then if you start scrolling, you could see these ones. Scroll a lot more, you could see these ones. Honestly, I didn't like that, and many others testers didn't like that. So we said, please try to find a solution. And it seems that the solution they found is this one, where instead of having 2, we now start to having 3 with a slightly smaller bar for the need. Honestly, I do like that. I don't know. I mean, we'll have to see in the game how it's feeling and if it's easy to see and all of this. But to me, it does seem like a great solution. I really like to be able to see all of them together. So that seems really great. Okay, so obviously describing actually these items or needs and giving you the names of each, I won't do. That's definitely covered by my technical test NDA. But I think there's some interesting elements to note. The first one is obviously that some of them do like sort of food, right, or drinks. Like this one, especially here, you can see it a bit more. Yeah, and that's definitely a drink. Other definitely not a drink, like this one and that one. But the most important element for me is actually what is a building versus what is an actual need, a consumption need, right? In the past, you could always see it with the logos, right? The icons, where this is definitely a building because it has sort of a background element versus all of these don't, right? And these are our needs. So if we apply the same rule here, we can see that this is probably a building. It's not a building, not a building, a building, not a building, not a building, not a building, a building, not a building, not a building. Which would mean instead of having just one for your needs plus more for your happiness, right? Like the bank or I forget the name, sorry. The club, sorry, the member clubs. So instead of having one, you now have 4, right? So for your cities where you have very packed investors, very packed engineers, that may require quite a few changes depending on the size of those buildings. So get a bit ready for that. Obviously, these are the same here. We can see it. You can see that some of them are still locked and other not. What is quite interesting in here, I don't know if that's a change, that the bug, etc., right? But we have some needs that are blocked, but others that are sort of later in the list that aren't blocked. So that could also be linked to, different sort of requirements for unlocking those different needs. Usually the needs for most of your residencies just unlock by how many you have, right? So maybe this is gonna be different. Maybe some of them are gonna be linked to how many engineers or investor you have, but maybe others are linked to how many level 3 skyscrapers you have, or others are linked to other elements. So that could be quite interesting. And then, as we mentioned before, the panorama effect, that's something completely new that will give you a boost to your skyscraper number of residents, reduce maintenance cost, and provide bonus. Provide bonus resident, I guess, is linked to the maximum number of residents. So this is mainly, a way to try to get as many residents as possible in that one, but also balancing with the maintenance cost. And the way it works, I think is sort of clearly shown on those pictures here, is if you take one skyscraper, let's say in the middle of that block, now there is a radius around it, and that skyscraper is going to look at all of the other buildings around it, and it's going to look at all the other skyscrapers. It's important is, this investor house here, this engineer one, this artisan, or all of these farmers, they actually don't count. They don't matter at all. They don't give anything to it. What matters is only the other skyscrapers. So what it means is, if you're level 1, actually it won't, you can't have panorama effect, because you will never be bigger than other skyscrapers. It will only start later. But for example, if you're level 3 and around you have level 1 and 2, then you're gonna get, let's say, positive panorama effect. But if at the same time you have a level 5 next to you, then you're gonna get negative effect. And then sort of combining this positive and negative will show you your panorama effect, which you can see here. I'm guessing this is gonna be the final UI visual. This is your panorama effect, and you can see it says strong. You see two bars out of 3 or something like this. So you can see this is probably not the highest level, but it is already some level. And that's basically how it works, is depending on how positive you are, right? So how many skyscrapers do you look down on, you will get more positive effect, versus if you don't, then you don't get any positive effect. I have to admit that, so this was sort of a first test where they put icons, then they moved into colors. This was apparently one version they tried, and then the current colors. This was indeed the colors in our technical test. I don't know if it's going to be the final one. To be honest, I quite like this one, with the red one really showing what's sort of preventing you, versus this one, it's less easy to see, I feel, to be honest. But anyway, the panorama are really interesting, because if you think about min-maxing in sort of a perfect world, you will want all of your skyscrapers to probably be level 5. But then if you do that, you don't get any panorama effect. So that means even in sort of an, it obviously depends on how much bonuses we're going to get from the panorama effect. But depending on that bonus, there's going to be, once again, some interesting balancing / calculation to be done on what is the optimal. Do you have, do you need to have the highest level of panorama on one level 5 and then many level 3 or 4 around it, or is it something else, right? So there's going to be some interesting elements there, and some great players, as always, started during the technical test, but I'm sure the numbers could also change to the final version. So that's going to be something interesting, and they say more on that topic in the second DevBlog. So let's see how that comes in. And we're getting towards the end of that DevBlog. I will then just come back to show something you may have missed too, but otherwise, the last thing that's very important, of course, is at the end of the DevBlog, they give us the release date. So Tuesday, August 31st at 6 p.m. CET. So that's really not far away, 19 days. I mean, depending on where you are in the world, that's really cool. I personally can't wait for this. I think this is going to be bringing a lot of new challenges. As they say at the bottom, please be aware that many script shots are work in progress. So once again, this may not be the final one. This may not be the final one, but it's still interesting to see where we are at. So one element I want to show is here the influence. You can see this one has 8 influence, this one only 4, but also bringing some attractiveness, which could come from, of course, items. You can see the maintenance I mentioned earlier here, and once again, I'm not. This is probably not the final one, right? Because especially the UI is not final, so that's clearly shows it's probably an old screenshot, but still, minus 5,800 for just one skyscraper, and this one, even by providing a number of elements, you have a maintenance of 4,800 almost. So that's going to be a challenge for sure to look at. Okay, so as I promised, 2 last points that we sort of didn't talk about up until now and that you may have missed. The first one you can find here and there is that based around this maintenance cost or around sort of the money, let's say, they said that they found a compromise and even added a new difficulty setting. So I think this could be quite useful again to sort of personalize or tailor the game that you want to play. Right? Do you want it to be very easy? Do you want it to be focused on money, or do you want to be focused on something else? And very interestingly, as they say, it's including for your old save games. So we won't have to create a whole new game after the release to be able to enjoy that. So I think this one for me is quite interesting. And then the second element is actually not in the blog itself, but if we look at the first comments from Fox, I'm pretty sure, Fox, that's you. You're talking about actually the items, and this is, or specialist if you wish. And this is indeed something that they haven't really talked about in the DevBlog, except a bit here, but not showing anything new, at least from the icons. But it's not just for the skyscraper, right? We could have items that impact the skyscrapers. They could even have decide that some items don't impact them anymore, right? Like you could say, I don't know, that something only impacts engineer houses up to level skyscraper level 1 or something like this. But the other element is, if we look at all of these new needs, they need to come from new buildings, new production chains. So are we going to get some items for these? This was a big stuff feedback from the tourist DLC when a number of new production chains were introduced without any items. And min-maxers are very big on items. This is what makes the difference, right, between a sort of a normal production chain and a production chain on steroids. How many items can you put on it and how strong they are? So that's going to be interesting to see, maybe covered a bit more in the next devblog, or we may have to wait until the actual release. But hopefully we're going to hear some interesting, hopefully they've heard a bit of the feedback and we're going to see some items, even maybe some items for the tourist DLC. Let's see. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, as I said at the beginning, this was definitely a very different episode from usually. I hope you did enjoy it. Don't hesitate to press the like button, to leave a comment, maybe share your thoughts, your questions. I may be able to answer some, of course, without breaking the NDA as much as possible. But yeah, hope you like this episode and hope to see you next time, of course, covering more Anno and other games.